transition into something else. Um, Feel free to turn the camera on or off, microphone on or off during a discussion. This is going to be recorded and will be posted on social media afterward. The breakout rooms won't be recorded. The chat box is also an opportunity to ask questions and share thoughts, and we'll keep an eye on that. Graphics will be made available afterward as another resource. Whiteness is present and pervasive. None of us are above, beyond, or outside of systems of power and oppression. All systems of oppression stem from whiteness and are interconnected. They are relentless, and so we must be. Experiment and be open to new ideas. Respect confidentiality. These pages are private for the safety of the students who wish to have a safe space online. If you wish to share something that you have learned or discussed on this page, please follow our recommendations of sharing the plot, not the characters. Suspend assumptions, including gender, race, etc. No one is an empty vessel. Have thoughts are welcome. Acknowledge your dominant identities. Recognize how they impact you and those around you, both in this space and beyond this space. So check your privilege. Challenge by choice, decentralize, deconstruct, decolonize. Misgendering is an act of emotional and psychological violence that leads to and is predicated by systemic violence. Misgendering can look like using the wrong pronouns to refer to someone who is dead. So always ask for someone's pronouns. And Lerone and Nikki are our panelists for today. So please introduce yourselves. You folks are wonderful, so please take the floor.
You're doing great, Amira. Don't even worry about it. You're doing great. How you doing? My name is Lerone Ellison. I am 39 years old. I'm very interested in the conversation today. Also found out, because I had to Google it, I'm officially an old head. Like, I put on Maze and Frankie Beverly yesterday and listened to the entire song. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting how we get this, cross-generational conversation going. But baby, cool.
My name is Nikki. I am an artist, a mother, and a lover of baked goods. I'm a Los Angeles native and lifelong resident, Inglewood, California, to be specific. And let's see, my major was sociology. I have a degree in social justice and community organizing. I use my art to resist systems of oppression. I teach anti-oppression, not anti-racism, because I am not nice enough to do anti-racism work. So I believe that racism is just a symptom of much larger structural issues. And so that is always my objective, to get at the root of the problem and not treat the symptoms, but treat the disease itself. So I am a co-creator of Interrupting Racism, which is a speaker series, and we create curriculum and conversation and really just arm people with information so that they can go out into the world and have conversations with racist Uncle Joe, or their homophobic Nana or whoever. And I created that about 4 years ago with a good friend of mine, and then she kind of passed the torch. And then Lerone and I started working on Interrupting Racism together. So we're super happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to transition into the presentation that I've prepared for today, which is short, I promise, but it's also a little bit dense. So I'm gonna start with promoting our Meet the BCC staff that is happening tomorrow from 4 to 5. So if you'd like to get to know me and Corey a little bit better, that is something that is open to anyone who would like to come. I will also be, I actually, you know what, I'll do it right now if I can. Or actually, you know what, after the presentation, I'll share the link to the presentation so everyone can see it. I will also upload a PDF of it into the chat so everyone can kind of get the information at their own pace and have access to it. There is also a third Imagining Abolition event happening on Wednesday, September 30th. the PA, Georgina, and Michael will also be hosting it. They are fantastic people. So please show up to that Imagining Abolition event as well. So yes, now I will be getting into it. This is Slave Revolts to Prison Abolition, as hosted by the BCC. So I think it's important to acknowledge that slavery as an institution was upheld by three ideologies and or systems, that being patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. These were ways to dehumanize Black people and ways to subjugate a population and a way to dehumanize them. You cannot enslave people you think are equal to you. So if folks use white supremacy as a vessel for using religion to justify slavery, then there would be different ways to kind of attack that. I will be talking about slave revolts in the next slide. There are no pictures, but it is violent content. So if folks need to mute their laptop, if they need to step away for a second, I totally understand that. This is a judgment-free zone. These things are not easy to talk about. So yeah, if anyone needs to do that, I'm just going to give that a second. All right, I'm going to be going to the next slide right now. So the first slave rebellion that often gets mentioned a lot is the Stono Rebellion of 1739, where 20 Africans raided a warehouse store and decapitated the white owners of that place and placed their heads on the store steps as kind of like a symbolic rebellion. Colonial forces started killing after a week because the insurrectionist numbers grew, and it set precedent for, I believe it was the Carolina colonies, to start rebelling even more after that. Not to say that this is the first slave rebellion, but this was a prominent one that a lot of historians took note of because it set precedent. Then there's and these are obviously just 5 main ones. These are not all of them, but these were ones that I find to be very worthwhile to mention. The next one is the New York Conspiracy of 1741. Fort George in New York was set on fire along with 4 other fires in New York, in addition to New Jersey and Long Island, all in one day. This was basically understood to be folks working together in a conspiracy to set ablaze institutions that were upholding slavery, whether it be businesses or just different things. Then there's the Gabriel's conspiracy in 1800. This was inspired by the Haitian revolts, which were occurring at that time. A large unidentified number of people had coalesced, roughly 1,000 predicted, but it's not really well known. But unfortunately, a storm had occurred. The goal was to hold Governor James Madison hostage, but that didn't happen due to the low numbers. Then there is the German Coast Uprising in 1811, which happened in the Louisiana area, New Orleans specifically. 25 Africans had attacked plantation family owners. They raided a militia warehouse. This was noted to be a well-organized rebellion. They sang Creole songs while also executing the folks that had enslaved them. Afterwards, the German Coast Uprising, any Africans who had participated in it were then beheaded and their heads were lined up on a road in New Orleans. Then there's the Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831, where 70 armed Africans raided different houses, killed their masters, and basically a white local militia began attacking them. Some of the Africans that were participating in it were either executed or sold. It was noted that Nat was dismembered and distributed. It was actually rumored that his decapitated head was last held in Worcester College, Ohio. Other than that, they used his remains and made purses out of it and other just really disturbing things. And then there's the founding of prisons and the police force, and this is where the modern context of prison abolition begins, because you see that slavery is not abolished, only reformatted and restructured into a different system. So slavery is illegal except as a punishment of crime where the party shall be duly convicted. This means that if a government can strip you of the right to vote and can re-enslave you through imprisonment, they have political and economic incentive to imprison its dissenters. So anyone who riots, even in modern times today that we have been seeing, folks who have been arrested today, it is through government incentive that it's incentivized, basically, is what I'm saying. Southern states had their first kind of presence of policing through slave patrols. Early police officers actually wore their Confederate uniforms before they had institutionalized into a policing structure, and eventually a police state. So this format of what we saw as slavery in the center earlier has now transformed into patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, reformatting and rewording what was slavery into the prison industrial complex. And this is a map of just not even all of it. I don't think you can even fit all of that into one. Some may have gone unreported, but these are a lot of the Black massacres that have occurred on the eastern side of the US. I know that modern day, like today, Rosewood and Tulsa are examples of how wealthy Black neighborhoods have now become ghettos, because of the just mass destruction that has occurred at the hands of police officers and at the hands of state sanctioned violence. So now this is the last slide, I promise. So just to define abolition going forward, so we are all on the same page as it. It is the act of officially ending or stopping something. Obviously, abolition has taken different contexts from back then to now, whereas like slave abolitionists believe that slavery should ended, but slave abolitionists may not have believed that Black people were equal to them, if that makes sense. And you can even look at this information from Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete, which is a great book, that 5%, that the US is 5% of the world's total population, whereas 20% of the world's combined prison population. And this obviously was after prisons were privatized and basically just proliferated, because if you can profit off of an institution, then you are likely to repeat it, remake that institution, and just keep on creating it. So I'm going to pass it on to Lerone and Nikki to kind of pick up onto the modern context of what abolition looks like today.
Well, thank you so much. So it's funny, we talk about patriarchy a lot, and then we also have to acknowledge our invisible steps towards upholding that patriarchy. So I think I'm going to accuse myself from speaking first, if you want to go ahead.
Okay. Well, coming right in on like the tail end of the presentation, the interesting thing about, you know, being 5% of the world's population, but having 20% of the world's prisoners is that if anyone is familiar with Ruth Wilson Gilmore and the work that she's done in abolition and some of the quite a bit of the writing she's done, specifically Golden Gulag, where she talks about California and how we are actually, you know, an epicenter of the prison industrial complex boom. What has happened is that, as was basically stated, when you start manufacturing these prisons, you need to fill them, regardless of whether or not there are people committing enough crimes or whatever. Like, you're not going to just build this million, billion, trillion, whatever dollar facilities, you know, this sprawling multi-acre monstrosity, and then not put anyone in it. And so we do see a cycle. So what we're going to talk about is, I think, the heart of policing and surveillance, which is something that we discuss a lot, the intentions behind it, where we find it, and then how to start to dismantle that, or how to start to abate that and move into an abolition conversation.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So I think that, again, not to repeat what Amira was saying, but really coming in at the importance of understanding that one of the first things that we say, it's not just, you know, that slave patrols were the early form of policing. We have to look at that and encompass it into the entire structure of where America was at that point, and how the people that were hired for slave patrols, what their backgrounds were. Whether it be social, educational, for anything like a financial, you start to see a similarity even now. And that's one of the striking things for me when it comes to your average municipal hire for a police force. What I mean is slave patrols were low skilled labor because they did not want anyone that could actually question what the motives were for the state that was in power to one, dehumanize, to pay them to pretty much cattle and chattel other human beings and bring them back to a life of servitude. How that corresponds within modern times is not just, well, the average IQ or the requirement. There is an IQ requirement, meaning that if you test above your in the police score and in the police testing, you actually won't be allowed to become a police officer. And the anecdotal evidence is where people who actually applied to become police officers, whether it be Chicago, Detroit, whether it be LA or the neighboring counties, have come back with the same conversation that they said I scored out of what is required. And the reasoning is one of two things. Either one, we felt like you'd be bored with this, or number two, you might not be the type of person that could quote unquote take the work or handle it.
I think it's important to discuss specifically the invention of whiteness and how, you know, up until really chattel slavery was activated, that there were no white people, that there were European people from different parts of Europe with their own cultures and ethnicities and backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. Whiteness is literally an invention because this was a way to make poor white people and even indentured servants feel as if they had more in common with the European elites, so that it could kind of break up any possibility for unification and rebellion amongst, once again, poor white people and indentured servants, and then African people and enslaved Africans. And so once you had that, there became, you know, then slavery, then chattel slavery became associated with skin tone. And then it secured so-called white people, or people racialized as white, with the understanding that regardless of how impoverished and destitute and uneducated and disregarded and trampled upon they were, at least they would never be a slave, like at minimum. And then you could have power over another group of people because they were deemed by legislation to actually be less than you. So I feel like that's the foundation for policing, because then you have people that have a vested interest in beginning to patrol and, you know, bring slaves back, and even, you know, be the slave master, or be on the field, you know, working the slaves, and not necessarily have ownership to the plantation or any of the proceeds coming from that place, but, you know, they're the slave driver. So kind of like upholding this system and kind of being thrown scraps. At minimum, you will not be enslaved. At minimum, maybe you could have a living wage, you might have an opportunity to do something, but you'll never actually own land probably, and you'll never really be taken seriously. You'll always be a part of the working class. And there is a direct correlation between that group of people, who are often the Irish, the, you know, like the dregs of, you know, white society, viewed as less than even in that group. But those people, and now at present, working class, white people, and also Black people, Latinx people who are looking for an opportunity to have a pension, advance themselves, provide for their family, and also differentiate themselves from the community and the group in which they're policing. There is this idea that, you know, of aligning yourself with whiteness, and aligning yourself with that power structure, even as an oppressed or marginalized person. Whereas, like, if I latch onto this, I will be safe. In the same way that women often uphold patriarchy. Well, you know what? If I adhere to the standards and the precepts of patriarchy, and I just go ahead and uphold that and get myself a husband and try to act right and clean the house, then when the patriarchy does what it does, which is destroy, which is, you know, batter and bruise and deplete, maybe I can still have some sort of accommodations made for me because I've aligned myself with that system. So I think that that's really, really important to understand the mindset of individuals that police. And this idea of, you know, feeling like you are serving, you're doing something good, you know, for your community or the community because you're keeping it safe, is definitely a narrative that we often see. And I've been to festivals, I've been to neighborhood festivals where, like, the local police department will have a tent set up, and they'll have, you know, people out recruiting, and they'll be passing out literature, and they'll be trying to talk to the neighborhood like, hey, you know, we're hiring, or do you want to do good in your community? Like, do you want to help our neighbors? And so there's this narrative of like, oh, you're doing good work in the community by keeping it safe and cleaning it up, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that it also, that particular line of employment appeals to people that don't understand outside of the concept of these structures that have been they have been born into, that is how you will improve the quality of life for people in your community and for yourself.
We're not speaking in a bubble either, or a vacuum, I should say. So we recognize immediately, one, DePaul University is situated in what city, right? Chicago, Illinois. So it stands to reason that at least 98% of the people that are in this conference in here have an understanding of Chicago's police department, more so have an understanding of DePaul's quote unquote campus security. It stretches into all those major features of what folks consider safety, whether it be education status, you know, if you have your master's or your master's, anything like that, well, you're deemed safe. Whether it's neighborhood, or, you know, Lincoln Park is such a great neighborhood. It's better than when so-and-so was here. And you find out actually that better than when so-and-so was here is an actual cultural history that was erased for the sanctity and safety of a ruling class of people. So those are the parts when you start to talk to people who not only have been in Chicago, not only actually looked at the history, but understand why things are the way they are, that you start to see the revolts that have really never ended in Chicago. And I always like put this out. I didn't put it out earlier, so I apologize, but I speak about Chicago with love because I respect it. Also, I'm from Evanston, Illinois. So I don't even like, let's not just pretend, you know, like one thing that Amir and I share, when people ask us where we're from, we always say, I'm from outside the city. It's quite all right. But with that, the way in which we talk about these things, the way in which we say, you have to be careful how you ingratiate yourself with that power structure, the power structure that is white supremacy. It is because it is deemed to turn you against your own self. The example that we always talk about, the example that is always prevalent is the rise of Black police officers. That this is 2020, so let's say 60 years ago, that was a main driving goal for a lot of people in a lot of major cities that had a high Black population. If we have Black cops, then we have people that are from the community. We have people that will know who we are, that will understand us culturally. And one of the things when I was in school, someone came to speak to us just as we're speaking with you all right now, is we protested in the 50s and 60s. I remember she said this, we protested in the 50s and 60s to have Black police officers. It wasn't until the 80s that we realized a Black cop is still a cop. So as we talk about the story, a German cop is still a cop. An Irish cop is still a cop. A Black cop is still a cop. We've seen in recent news, a Black DA, still a DA. Because you are never hired, no, excuse me, I don't want to say never. It is part of the structure's responsibility to preserve its state.
Right.
If it has to relent and hire someone who is not white identified by doing that, that quote unquote vetting process then becomes what they call the crucible, right? How much pressure can you take? Have you shown a history of voting for the side of justice versus voting for those people, those, I say deviants, for lack of a better term right now. So that's the other layer within this, is that I saw it come up, skin folk and kinfolk, which is unfortunately is true. It also is a way in which the system itself says, you know what, there's something unique about you. Not only are you part of this culture, or not only are you part of this community, we trust you to go out and catch all those deviants, all those vagrants and things like that. Thank you. Exceptionalism. So that's one thing that, even though we talk about this a lot, and I hear people, some people want to discourage folks from going to college because you just become part of the system. You just become part of that brainwashed conglomerate. The truth about it is, in institutions of power, instruction institutions, almost always you will find white supremacy. So whether you are a cop or you're a student in a prestigious university, PWI or no, you are always required to be aware of how you're being used. Mm-hmm. We all know the reach and the desire for scholarship. We all understand the reach and the desire to be recognized amongst our peers. But what if your peers are the very people that after you leave the room, they lock the door and say, how in the hell did this person get in here? So those are the things that we talk about decentralizing power. We talk about dismantling white supremacy. Yes, we focus on police officers for this point, but overall, we must focus on how much we look forward to either that recognition from or that acceptance into those same power structures.
Right. Well, I want to say, before we kind of transition maybe into some other bits of this conversation, that abolition requires imagination. And so, yes, we are married to, once again, these systems and power structures that we were born into, because when have we seen anything different? You've never with your eyes seen anything but policing. You've never seen anything but, the two-party system. You've never seen anything but these things. So you don't understand how you can make a difference in your, community without being a cop or without entering into the system, or you don't understand, how you can hold people accountable who cause harm in communities and commit crimes. And that's another conversation later. Crime, what is crime? But you don't know how you can hold people accountable without, how do we not arrest people? How do we not brutalize people? How do we not lock people up? How do we not execute people? Like, what? There's going to be pandemonium. There's going to be anarchy. We don't know how to do this. It requires imagination, first of all. And so the fact that collectively we don't have enough of a colorful, robust imagination to create a different system, create an equitable system that humanizes people, then we do have Black people, Latinx people entering into not just the prison industrial complex as guards and cops and parole officers, et cetera, but also into the military, which is also another part of this conversation that we probably not going to get into today. But all of these, like, it's a many limbed monster. It has it's a huge tree with all of these different roots that permeate all of the various aspects of society. And so it is a system. It is not the individual people involved. You can go in with a good heart and the best of intentions, but it is an entire system that is older than you and I. And so it's going to take imagination to really begin to approach the conversation of not reformation, because that is a conversation that people keep trying to have about, well, we can reform the prison system. We can reform policing. We can. That which starts out wrong is not going to end correct. So we cannot reform the system. We cannot, we just need to get that out of our head. Abolition is the objective, and it must be the goal, so that we can actually begin to create systems and structures that humanize people and that are equitable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So my closing point, and Amira, you let me, again, I have a tendency to talk too much, so Amira, please feel free to mute me. It's all right. It's all right. But I wanted to go back to something I saw in the comments. So we all see the comments, but Daniel, you mentioned something. Daniel Brown, you said that do you mind if I read this out loud, or would you prefer that not to happen?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So at 3:06, you said that's deep because I used to want to be a cop when I was young. You know, like a lot of us, we look at that.
I used to want to be a criminal prosecutor.
Exactly.
As a child.
It's one of those things, right? It's like, because you see that, and what got me all my entire life, what gets me through is I've always looked up to Thurgood Marshall. I remember, book reports, everything, when everybody was choosing who are you going to write about, and within the system that I was in, I say fortunately, because this is why with the value of education, I had teachers from different walks of life that were very quick when we did, well, we know who he is now, but the old boy that said he discovered an entire continent, or entire a world of people, when they used to celebrate his day. I had a teacher that was very quick to say, how do you discover somebody that already lives there? So we're 6, 7 years old with a teacher brave enough to go like, I know what I'm supposed to tell you, right? But how do you discover people that are already there? And from that point on, so Danny, like we look back at those youthful days, and now it becomes, okay, how much of that did you see? I'm trying to say propaganda, but how much of that did you see that created this understanding that a police officer is the safest person that you can go towards? Right. Just dial 911. Now, if we, like, again, we talk about absolutely miseducation. We talk about Du Bois, and we talk about double consciousness. How do you now clean that up with a Black mind, with a Black body? And I'm African American, I'm Black, so that's why I speak from the Black mind. If you're not a person who identifies as Black, I understand that. Not to you, Danny, just to the group. But what I'm saying is, at some point in life, you have to recognize that the rules and the story you were given was not a generalized rule. It was not a generalized thing, meaning you call 911, someone comes to help you. So now it becomes a point where I have friends that at a moment's notice, they'll say, we're not coming to the party because they have nothing but Paw Patrol. And I'm like, what do you, I don't understand it. And they broke it down like, that is the indoctrination of another generation. Now, of course, I just see puppies. I just see a cartoon, but that is what we're dealing with. When we say systemic, when we say the difference with systemic and systematic, it's the moments when we were so ready to be a tool of that system. And it wasn't until either something occurred in our personal life or in our social understanding of the world, a person tapped us on the shoulder and say, let's just slow it down. Let's just ask ourselves some questions. And that, unfortunately, is what fervor does to people. You don't slow down fervor, which unfortunately is what's bringing out a lot of things right now. You don't slow down fervor. You stoke the flames. You get people so upset that they go against their best interests. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, before that person is even realizing what's going on, they are out of the game. And that is by design.
Mm-hmm. So abolition starts, I'm a mother, I mentioned that, out the gate. That is actually like a part of my identity. And even before that, I was a professional aunt. So children are important to me, a huge part of my life. And one thing that I say to people about racism, specifically white people, is that it starts in your home. It starts right where you are. You don't need a platform. So when we're talking about something like abolition, it starts in your home. Mm-hmm. It starts, we have children, or we have nieces and nephews, or, children that we care about, neighborhood children. That seed of, when I was little, I wanted to be a cop. That's not an uncommon aspiration or goal. You can ask, any first grader right now, and a lot of them, probably 90-80% will be like, yeah, I want to be a cop. I specifically remember in 3rd grade wanting to be a lawyer and wanting to be a criminal prosecutor. That was it for me. I was in 3rd grade. And part of that was go back to the imagination and the adults that were around me. I didn't have enough of an imagination or enough lived experience to know that there was more to law. I could have done corporate law. I could have done family law. I could have done all these other kinds of laws, but I had not been exposed to any of that. I didn't have anyone to have a conversation with me about that. So I just kind of went there because, you know, we all know the crime shows and the this and the that. I was being indoctrinated, and also in the schools. So I have a daughter that just turned 7 yesterday, and when I knew that the conversation was going to start happening about call 911 and the police and safety, and because safety, it always is joined with safety. It's a safety narrative that, you know, I didn't teach her to call 911. I mean, I think she knows now. She's mentioned it before, but I never taught my daughter to call 911. You don't call 911. You call your nana. Like, we have it to where she can tell the echo to call nana, to call her uncle, to call other people so that we can get emergency support if something happens. We have neighbors, we have a network, we have alternatives to call a police officer or bring, you know, policing into your neighborhood, because when you call 911 and it may be for an ambulance, but a squad car usually accompanies. Like, that's just the way it is. They go hand in hand. The conversations nowadays about defunding the police is a common sense conversation saying, hey, why is it that when we call for a health emergency, or when we call for some other type of aid, there's a cop sent out all the time? How about we start defunding the police in that we funnel these monies into other services so that we can actually get a social worker that comes out, so that we can actually maybe get a mental health professional, or we can get some other sort of mediation to come out and help with the situation, as opposed to call a cop all the time. We have animal control. Like, these things exist, but we won't fund them. And we have associated safety with policing. And the reality of the fact is, like, I don't know that, in my personal experience, police have not prevented any crimes. It's an after the fact. So when we talk about abolition, we are talking about getting in front of the problem too. We're talking about building up our other systems and building up our community so that we can actually start to address some of the disparities in our community and some of the issues that are reoccurring that cause interpersonal violence. Why are people, you know, shooting each other? Why are people fighting? Why is there domestic violence? That is a common issue 9 times out of 10 when the police are coming out, is because a couple is fighting. Why is this happening? What are the socioeconomic factors? How are people not receiving support as parents? How are people not receiving support in daily life, and it escalates to violence? So I had a neighbor about 10 years ago who was having a mental breakdown. I don't know exactly what his issue was, but he lived in my building downstairs from me. Apparently he had gone off of his medication. This young man started barking at passerby outside. Like, he was escalating. And one day Inglewood PD came out and they surrounded the building and they killed him. And the reality is that all that really needed to happen was that somebody just needed to probably call his mama. You know, like, these are conversations that we need to have, because if we want to imagine abolition, we actually have to be in community with each other, and we're going to have to actually start talking to our neighbor. We're going to have to know each other. We're going to have to not be scared to try to de-escalate situations if they're being loud in the alley, or, you know, with a party. Like, you're going to have to learn how, or maybe create some sort of system in which there are people that can go and say, hey, like, can you turn on your music? Or, hey, you know, this is an issue, or have emergency contact information so that we can just call his mom and say, your baby is outside barking. Can you please come and get him, so that Inglewood PD won't come and kill him. So that is a reality, and that is one of the results of policing. I think that as a person with privilege, I have class privilege, I have education privilege, able-bodied privilege, cisgender privilege. I can go down the line, like, for all the ways that I am marginalized and oppressed. I have all this privilege, so it's really actually easy for me to come into a neighborhood and be like, y'all too loud. This is getting on my nerves. Y'all need to do like this. I'm going to call the police. But we need to start thinking about the impact of that when we light that match and toss it over our shoulder and walk away. And there's this explosion in our wake where lives are destroyed because we didn't care. We weren't careful enough to think about how else can I resolve this issue in my community and not bring the police here. Even if you are you need to file a police report. Maybe you do. Go to the police station. Don't call them to come to you. Don't bring them into your community. So we need to really start thinking about all of the ways that we can be proactive, get in front of these issues that escalate to violence, and identify those targets of surveillance and profiling and actually really work to protect them.
Thank you so much for that. That was it was a lot. And I think at the end there, Nikki, you touched on, I'm gonna remove the spotlight real quick. I apologize. You touched on something that was really important, and that it's the first step to abolition is creating the community in which we abolish systems together. No one person can go out of their way and do this. There's no such thing as a leader. We do this as community, and we do this as hand in hand. Right now, I'm going to be switching up the pace to some breakout rooms so we can self-reflect and talk about what we just heard. I'm going to put in chat some reflection questions so we can talk about, and I'm just going to read it out loud. What is the role of punishment in your life, and what is its role in society? Does this give you undue anxiety? What can you see for yourself in a world that does not have policing as we know it? You don't even have to talk about these questions in particular. We can even, in the breakout rooms, just talk about what Lerone and Nikki have mentioned in the past bit, because I think there's just so much to unpack and so much to think about in actions that we can associate with these ideas. I hope everyone's breakout room conversations went well, that you felt stimulated by it, that you loved it, that you were super into it the whole time. And yeah, so now this is going to kind of open up into more of a bigger group discussion. I would ask that for the last, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, that we just allow for some space to kind of decompress, ask ourselves a few questions, and also give time for a promo for Lerone and Nikki, because they got some projects, they got some stuff, they got some things going on that I think they should be able to talk about at the end. But for right now, if there's anything that folks want to kind of give input on what they heard in their breakout rooms, what they think was fruitful from their breakout rooms, Lerone and Nikki, I'm going to let y'all have the floor first. So you can talk about your breakout rooms and what you think was really important for people to know.
So we had 2 people in our breakout room. Now, here's where I get the ding for being a bad host, because I have Derek and I want to say Tianla. Okay, yeah. Cool. Thank you. But we all spoke about what punishment means, what has it looked like in our own lives. And we spoke about, the idea of restorative justice, and really acknowledging that, some of us, it's been a thing where we understand corporal punishment from childhood, and we made a choice to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to go that route. And for others, it was really like, well, no, I never wanted to get punished. So, I just kind of was like, no, let me go ahead and isolate you, get away from that type of behavior and everything. But how restrictive that maybe could be. And I mean, it's restrictive on both sides. And then we ended it with really looking at restorative justice itself not being something that is discussed because it actually takes power away from folks who deem themselves more important than others. So I hope I kind of cleared that up. Again, Tianla, please let me know or Derek, please let me know if I misspoke, of course.
I think a thing that we didn't discuss in our breakout too, and it's important to note, is that something like 80% of restorative justice dollars go to police departments.
Oh yeah.
So, and they're not doing that work. So when we talk about defunding the police, that is literally what we mean. We mean stop awarding these entities funds for work that they do not do. Let's actually give that money to organizations and individuals that are doing restorative and transformative justice work, and doing more than handing out backpacks, because that'll be what it looks like to them, and not actually leading conversations for creating community solutions. And so when we talk about, I mentioned earlier, I said crimes, crime, because what is criminal activity? So first of all, who has deemed something criminal? What was the motivation behind that? Why are certain things criminalized? Some things are not. Some things are, the prison sentence is harsher for some people than others. We know who created that and who does it benefit. It's all about the commodification of the body, and it's all about the politics of the body, getting to determine who is illegal, what human being is illegal. That is not a thing that can be. There can be no illegal people. The creation of borders, the building of walls, the shackling of people, and restricting people from certain areas. We see this, when we talk about housing justice and homelessness. That is a politics of the body. You cannot be here. I was explaining to my 7-year-old daughter today about hostile architecture. It's called something else, where you'll see a bus bench that has the armrest in it. That's not to make you comfortable. That's to restrict people from lying down flat. So how we are controlling where people go, what is legal and what is not legal, who can be where, and usually it has to be with how much you pay to be in a space. And we associate that with